We have changed the way we work, the way we live, socialize, and buy. We have reevaluated what really matters, both personally and professionally. Life remains uncertain, the future unpredictable. These are strange times, and so it is not surprising that there are new values consumers hold dear. Understanding and leveraging these new values is critical to your success. The rules of the game were already changing, but now the game has changed too. You turned up to play baseball to find it is now on ice. Time to get some skates.
And now let's welcome Mr. Kent Hughes.
Good morning, Cyprus. How are you? It's a delight and honor to be welcomed back to your fantastic event. I loved being there last year, and I'm really sad not to be there, of course, physically this year, but here I am digitally. This is, I guess, as good as we get today. So it's a delight to be here, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. I am, as always, fascinated by the culture of consumers, by their expectations, and by how those things have changed. And as a behavioralist, of course, I really enjoyed the last 7 or 8 months. Maybe I'm the only person in the world that has enjoyed this, because I'm watching consumer behavior and social behavior change by the day. So, I mean, every single day we wake up and our society is fundamentally different. We want different things from life, different things from our work, different things from our friends and family. We have reevaluated what's important. And in business, of course, connection is what's always important, and understanding what people want and what drives them has fundamentally changed from when I met you last year. So now I want to go through some new values of this, what I've called this captive economy, this idea that we are all, I guess, trapped somehow in a new reality. And so I was trying to find a word that would explain this idea, and I think the captive economy does that. So I'm going to race through some slides, and I'm going to share a deck with you. I guess what I really want to talk about is the idea of the customer behind the mask. So I want to unmask what's happening behind that veil, so that you watching this can apply these new values to your business and to form those better connections and more relevant connections with consumers today. So I've always spoken about disruption and disruptive change all over the world. And of course, up till recently, most of that disruption was driven by technology and digital. And then there was subsequent behaviors that were changing because of that disruption. But now, of course, we have a new disruptive force in the world, disruption to the power of C19. And that disruption, of course, is political, economic, social, technological, it's everything, and it's global. And therefore, I don't think we've ever had a disruptive force that affects everybody, regardless of your race and social class. In high school, you learned, probably in the very beginning, actually, in physics, about Newton's laws of motion. And Newton's laws of motion are very simple. So if you're trying to get this ball up this hill, what you need to do is there are natural forces pressing against you. There are natural forces of gravity, and the mass of the ball is pressing down against you. These are natural forces that you can't change. But you, of course, need to apply a greater force than those natural forces to push that ball up the hill. So that capital F, big F there, is you pushing against it. And if you apply a greater force than natural forces, you move forward. And that's the same thing with change. Let's take the F's and change them to C's. The same thing is true of change. If you apply a greater force of change against the natural forces of change pushing against you, you move forward. And so at the moment, when you look at the natural forces of change, what are they? Because they're out of your control always. All you need to do is understand them and push back. But you need to push back harder to move forward. If you just push back the same, if you match them, you just stand still. And the problem with standing still in a rapidly changing world is that you actually move backwards. Even though you stood still, you thought you were doing a good job in the pandemic by standing still and keeping it together. But actually, unless you match the forces of change, you're going to move backwards. And that old expression, I would have used this slide with you last year also, old ways of working don't open any new doors. I always love that, because you need to remember that always. If we're not moving forwards, if we're not changing how we work, we end up just never really expanding. And so as the world changed, there was, of course, positive sides to this. This is one of the beautiful photographs from Japan early on in the pandemic. So when the streets emptied, of course, nature fills in the space. And so deers took to the streets, and we saw all the air pollution fade away all over the world as people stopped flying and people stopped moving and the traffic stopped. And so there were positives to this, I guess. But the weird thing is we had we had a kind of an economic 404 error. The whole world closed, economy not found. Everything shut down, and it was strange. Everyone was, of course, trapped in their homes, and we're kind of going through phase 2 in many countries now, where the pandemic is going back to those kind of April, May levels of lockdown. And so everyone was closed, businesses were closed, people were closed, society was closed, our social outlets were closed. And in the beginning, we had the panic, we had I want to bring you back to this, to remember where we've come from. Because these were, we were all told, of course, to work from home, which is easy if you're in the white collar business, less easy if you're a pilot, an archaeologist, or a lifeguard. That's my favorite, working from home. And so how do we all work from home? And of course, those of us who have children, there was this phrase that went around that if the scientists weren't going to find the cure for the pandemic, it was certainly going to be parents very, very soon. So this idea that how can you cope with children at home? And it's difficult. I mean, a lot of people had to do this. The idea, how do you work with your kids? And actually, if you don't do this, of course, if you leave your children unoccupied at home, they get up to all sorts of mischief. And this is the reality that people had to deal with during the pandemic. They colored in various surfaces. And this is my favorite. Look at the background there, where she's on a serious work call, and her kid is dressed as Spider-Man, squatting on the table behind her. It's just, I love that idea. So people had to cope with very new realities. And I think when we looked at the recovery, in business particularly, we love what's called a V-shaped recovery. This idea that when there's collapse, we get back to normal as soon as we can. So if you look at the stock markets, we always loved V-shaped recovery for things. And if you, in the sales business, you like the idea of a sales chart with a V-shaped recovery. And so in the beginning, March, April, if you cast your mind back to that, because this is where we've all come from as consumers, you will also have thought about this reality that will come, it'll bounce back. But of course, there will be no V-shaped recovery. And I think at this stage, we're all comfortable with that. So I was trying to think of a new shape that maybe would be more reflective of the recovery. And in the beginning of the pandemic, around kind of May, I decided to settle on this. This is I'm from Ireland, as many of you know, and this is a traditional Irish fishing craft called a currach. And they would use this off the Atlantic, off the west coast to fish. And it's a very shallow boat to cope with all the wild Atlantic waves. And so I thought that was actually a good shape for the recovery, because what had happened is we had a complete collapse, which was the now. That's what we were going through at the time. And then it was going to be an 18-month recovery economically and socially in terms of behaviors to eventually get back to where we were. So this was the idea that I thought, well, it's going to be a very flat, long linear recovery, not a V shape. And that was in my mind back in May. But then, of course, watching consumer behavior and watching the pandemic repeat itself in terms of the patterns growing again in many countries, I've decided that actually isn't true anymore, because that now then when kind of 3-stage recovery piece, while that's still valid, the then piece, the bit in the middle, isn't going to be a straight line. It's going to be a very spaghetti-shaped recovery. It's going to be an ebb and a flow, and we see that already in many, many countries where we're having resurgences, businesses relocking down, the resheltering happening, things are closing again. And so as a business owner, but more importantly as a leader of a team, you need to understand that you need to be relaxed about this idea of ebb and flow, because we're all so linear in our thinking. And this is a problem by the way we educate, by the way, and by the way we lead teams in corporate organizations. We tend to focus on KPIs and goals and project linear. Linear is seen as the result or as the aim. And this is going to exhaust us if we try and keep that mentality. It's going to be a very ebb and flow recovery, and we have to be comfortable with that. We have to be comfortable. So it's kind of like a roller coaster. So you're going to go backwards sometimes, you're going to go upside down sometimes, and that's okay. It'll always come good in the end. But we need to be comfortable with moving backwards, comfortable with being upside down. This quote that I've written, I think it's very true. Strength and success comes from your ability to be shaped by the external forces that challenge you. And look at that tree in nature. It's as the various forces pushed down on that, it didn't stop growing. It just moved around those forces to continue what it needed to do. And that's where your own strength and success as a leader, or as an educator, or as a business owner will come from, being able to adapt to what's happening around us. And during the summer, I was also fascinated by the lifeguards who were trying to explain to my kids on the beach one day about the rip tides. So the rip current, you all know how rip current works. It'll carry you straight out to sea. And many people, when they're caught in a rip current, will, of course, do the instinctive thing of turning around and trying to get back to shore as you're carried away. You try and swim, but swimming against the current, of course, will exhaust you. And the way to escape a rip current is not to swim against it, because you are not stronger than the ocean. It's to, of course, swim sideways, to swim out of the current. And once you're out of the current, you can, of course, swim back then to the shore. And that is a really good metaphor for what you need to do also in your own personal life and in your business life. Go in a different direction. Because if you just keep trying to fight back to where you were post or pre-pandemic, it's going to exhaust you. But if you go off in a different direction and bring your business or bring your life even in a different direction, you will find a whole new set of opportunities. So this is all about agility. It's all about being able to understand that actually, if I can build agility into my thinking and into my actions, then not only will you survive the pandemic, you will thrive in it. This is the moment where you need to bring it. You need to show up. Show up for yourself, and also show up for, let's say, your business or your education institution or wherever you work. And really, I can't stress this enough. This is a superhero moment. You don't want 2020, 2021 to be the years that you lost. You need them to be the years where you made an impact, the years where you stood for something, and the year where you made a difference. And lots of stuff is going on around the world. This is a yoga class in Toronto. And so, even though it's difficult to bring many people together in a room to do yoga, this yoga teacher got 50 geometric domes, filled them with fairy lights, and that's a positive experience. I want to go there. This is a sail-in cinema. And so you rent the boats, 6 friends rent the boats, and you go and you watch the movie for the evening. And it's an experience. It's great fun. People are smiling and laughing. This is the point. There's opportunity everywhere. And one of my favorite examples was this one, zoo. Think about a zoo during the pandemic. So of course they had to close in the early days. And the minute you closed the zoo, you had no revenue. And as a business, that's never good. But you still have all the costs. You have the vet costs, the animal costs to keep the premises and staff. And so how do you survive? Well, you pivot, you get agile. And this story I want to tell you is from a little small animal sanctuary zoo in California called Sweet Farm. And they had the same problem. They had many, many costs and animals, but they had no revenue. So they thought, well, what are people doing and what do we have? So they had all these animals, cute animals, and what are people doing? And if we can put those two things together, maybe we can make some money. And they launched a business, which I love, called Goat to Meeting. And what happens, for $65, you can log on and you can order a live alpaca or goat to pop up into your Zoom meeting. Isn't that fantastic? So the alpaca pops up in amongst all your Zoom friends or in amongst all your Zoom professional colleagues, and of course causes some laughter. And it became so popular. This is the important bit. It became so popular. They had to hire more staff to spend all day out in the paddocks with tablets and iPhones, recording live alpaca goats and in 15-minute segments for the world. And they made more money out of this product than they ever did on ticket sales, and they still do. And so this is the idea that maybe we can utilize the assets that we have, whether they're knowledge assets or whether they're physical assets, in different ways during the pandemic and seek new opportunities. And that really is the solution to thriving in a pandemic. So restaurants, because they had to close, or of course did takeaway, but some restaurants went even one step further. And not only did they do takeaway, but they started to do subscription meal solution boxes delivered to the local community. And now, of course, their kitchen is utilized all day. Before, it was only utilized in the evening for restaurant. Now maybe takeaway gives you another 2 hours earlier, but also subscription boxes gives you a whole 4 or 5 hours earlier. You already had the staff and the chef and the kitchen, so why aren't you utilizing the asset for more? And even when they reopened, they of course kept their takeaway and their subscription businesses going. And now the size of the cake, the size of their revenue is simply bigger. And if you look at how some people have dealt with the customer experience element of the pandemic and how lacking in creativity they've been. So there's 2 types of people in the world, I think. There's the people who do the basic, and there's the people who go beyond, who do that ripping the shirt open moment. So here's an example, and these were early pictures out of Asia, out of China, in the post-pandemic reality. So this was the social distancing, and the middle picture there is Starbucks, the middle one and the one on the right. So would you like to experience a cup of coffee in that store? I mean, you may as well stay at home. I'm sorry. That's not a positive customer experience. So there was other places trying to do it better. So this is a restaurant in Michigan. And so they've put some mannequins in, and that makes it a bit funny. I mean, to me, it's a little bit creepy, I'll be honest. But at least it's kind of something, I suppose, shareable. and you can maybe take a picture and a video, and it's a story. This is better. This is a small cafe in Germany where they gave everyone hats with pool noodles on them for social distancing. So that's fun. That's definitely a story. But my all-time award-winning favorite is this cafe in France who use giant teddy bears for social distancing. And that is really playful. And as a brand, that's what I want to be. You want to be a brand that makes someone laugh and smile. Yes, it's a pandemic. Yes, we have to have social distancing, but here's our solution. It's not going to be, masking tape in a Starbucks. It's going to be this. And so that's the way I think to cope with these new realities. And here's some of the most depressing pictures I've ever seen. These were from France, I think. This was the early days of education institutions reopening and putting children in little boxes on the playground it's just, there's nothing delightful about those images, is there? And here's the same in Shanghai and Disney. So imagine Disney. What are the Disney brand values? Their fun, their play, their family. They're certainly not standing in a little yellow box, are they? So, this is not a good way of sharing your brand values. And then this is a Netherlands nightclub. This is a nightclub product. Think about why people go to a nightclub. They go to dance, to move, to meet people. They certainly don't. Yes, there's music, but do you want to go to a nightclub and just sit in a chair and listen to some music? That is so broken. I'd rather stay at home and poke myself in the eye with a sharp stick. So sometimes, people get it wrong. This is a drive-in concert in Germany. And again, as an idea, you can think, okay, maybe on paper that sounded great. So if you were the first 3 or 4 or 5 rows of cars there, you're probably enjoying the concert. If you're in row 12 or 13, you may as well stay at home and watch it on YouTube. So I think some people had good intentions, but the final maybe product isn't great. But I want to show you a video in a moment of a product that I think is pretty good. So this was in the Ukraine, and it was what they called a vertical concert. And the concert basically took over an entire hotel. And in the middle of the summer in the Ukraine, there wasn't a huge amount of tourism, so the hotel was empty. There was people we all missed the music festivals this summer. I guarantee that everyone watching here would have liked to have gone to a music festival maybe, and they weren't happening. And then, of course, the musicians and the concert promoters had no money. So all those 3 problems came together. And they put on a concert where they took over the whole hotel. And you could book a room in the hotel with 6 of your friends. So there's your little social bubble. And then you would use the balcony, and all the balconies overlooked the stage of the music. And you could party away in your little social bubble of 6 of you, and you could bring your own drink to the room. You had the room for the whole evening, so you could sleep in the room also, that little festival feeling. And then you could dance away on the balconies and watch the concert, which is a win-win-win for everybody when you think about it. So, tech crew, if you can play the vertical concert video for me, please. Hopefully. So, you get the idea, yeah? So I do wonder, though, had the architects of that hotel ever wondered what would happen if 6 people in every single bedroom in the hotel stood on their balcony and jumped up and down at the same time? I don't think the hotel balcony architecture had ever been tested that way. But, so that's, to me, is a good example of what I would say a win-win-win. Everyone's happy. The customer's happy. You can see the smiles in the faces. The musicians, the concert promoter gets revenue. The hotel gets revenue. That is the solution that the businesses that we all should be looking for. And we live in a strange world now. Of course, we queue for a living. There's queues everywhere. That bottom right one, there's the queue for McDonald's when it opened on the first day. Everyone wants a Big Mac. So we have a massed economy, a massed marketplace, queuing for a living. So that was just a setup, I guess, for the reality of the world we live in. So now I want to talk about 4 key values of this new captive economy and what that means and how consumers have changed and what are the main values that you need to build into how you communicate to your customer, how you even if you're building a business, how to be successful. So I want you to take a pen or a pencil, no matter where you are in the world watching this, because now is the time you want to scribble down some of these values. Because the worst thing about digital events is that people tend to fold their arms. It's a bit like Netflix, isn't it? You kind of Netflix and chill, you watch it and you think, hey, this is great. But actually, if you're going to get some value out of my presentation today, what I'd like you to do is write down the 4 values I'm about to go through. Write down what they mean in terms of what I'm going to talk about, and then write down what that means for what you're doing in your business, your brand, or your life, even, and what the ramifications and the relevance to you. And then at least you get something out of the presentation. So the first thing I want to talk about in terms of values is freedom and autonomy, the need for control, which is autonomy. And we have built entire democracies on the principle that you are free to make your own choices. Freedom is an inherent belief in our society, and I'm free to be who I want to be and do what I want to do. And you're free to make choices, and you make big choices sometimes, and you're free to make them. You're free to decide where you want to live, where you want to work, where you want to go on vacation. You used to be free to be able to choose where you went on holiday. Who you're going to marry and spend your life with. Will you have a baby? Will you start a family? Will you buy a new car? These are all big choices, but you're free to make them. And you're also free to make, by the way, hundreds of tiny, tiny, small choices every day. What will I have for lunch? Will I buy a sandwich or soup? Will I have another beer with my friends? And all these tiny, tiny choices that you make. And suddenly all these choices and the freedom to choose were taken away from us. And so in the beginning of the pandemic, I spent a lot of time researching the psychological states of kidnapping, captivity, slavery, any situation where humans had their freedoms taken away from them. I read and I studied, because that's what everyone is going through now. Globally, everyone is slightly captive, and therefore the behaviors that people exhibit in those situations are relevant to us. So we are all now slaves to a virus. If you want to look at slavery, we're all slaves to this virus. We have no control. Everything is a little bit uncertain, which brings, of course, stress and loneliness and anxiety and fear. And anyone who has been through a loss of any sort, whether it's a personal loss and death, or a relationship loss, or you have moved through this grief cycle. You understand the grief cycle. First we deny, we get quite angry, there's a lot of bargaining, then there's the depression stage and acceptance. What people misunderstand, and this goes back to the spaghetti recovery, is that people think that you move through this grief cycle in nice little neat ways and you pop out the end quite happy. Now what happens is not that. It's like a yo-yo. You yo-yo back and forward in this grief cycle. And so sometimes you think you're further and you go backwards, and that's what we're experiencing right now in terms of pandemic recovery. We're going to move back and forward, back and forward. And so there's often in society and in customers this anxiety, and we go from anger and depression. And so I'm really interested in fear and how powerful a force fear is. Because most of our negative emotions, for instance, as humans, come from fear. There's an argument that there is only 2 human emotions, love and fear, and everything else stems from those 2 things. And so fear, which we're all feeling, is so powerful, you can't actually stop it. Because it also saves your life sometimes in the real world. But so if you look at how strong physical fear is, physiological fear, for instance. So think about the last time someone jumped out at you from behind a door or under a stairs, or you did it to someone. That reaction of just sudden fear. If you look at what happens in the physiological body, so physically what happens is that two things will happen. Firstly, the person's hands will come into their body. So the person's hands will fly around their body to protect them in a sudden danger situation. So the fear kicks the adrenaline hormone, and you suddenly throw your hands up near your face maybe, or certainly around your body to protect yourself. The second thing you will do is scream. And you will scream both to scare away your attacker or to attract help. And you can really not stop those 2 things, the movement of the hand and the scream. And actually, I can show you a video here of some people being scared on the Ellen show, and you will actually understand that more. So can you play, tech team, can you play that Ellen Scares video for me, please? And you have a look at this.
12,000. So now you're saying so nothing will scare you anymore?
Nothing.
So you get the idea. You see it all the time. Like you see the hands fly in and that scream. And so the thing about fear, my point here is that you can't stop. It's such a powerful force that it takes over. It takes over your physical body, but it also, of course, takes over how you think and how you approach the world. And some types of fears are quite structured. So think about hurricane season in the United States coming to an end around now. So that's a scary thing. because obviously it's a natural force, it's quite uncertain. But there is actually a shape to hurricane season because we know how to deal with it because it comes around every year. So you know to board up your windows, you know to buy the emergency kits. And so there's a shape. There's a shape to that fear. And so if if you have a storm coming in your own country, for instance, you know what to do in your garden and you take things in and you put. So when we have a fear that has no shape to its edges, we get very uncontrolled. And that's where we had the toilet paper apocalypse, which I call it globally. People were so scared and so uncertain with what to do with this pandemic that they ended up acting in irrational ways. And toilet paper became this kind of, I wrote a blog on this if you want to jump onto my blog at some point about the toilet paper apocalypse. And so the idea here that people bought something that had no relationship actually to the pandemic, no relationship to the symptoms, but just everyone got panicked and started to buy. And this was really hunter-gatherer behavior. So again, this is real end of the brainstem stuff, instinct, where, we feel that we need to have some control. So we need to go out with our spear and gather, and capture. And so in uncertainty, you have strange behaviors. And there's the toilet paper apocalypse blog that I mentioned. So if you want to understand the psychology behind panic and the psychology behind herding mentalities and irrational behaviors, jump onto the blog after today and have a read. And so my point about freedom and autonomy, of course, is that to give your customer or consumers and society in general, actually, if you're government, back some feeling of control, you have to be proactive. You can't be reactive here. You can't kind of wait for people to go through the usual maze. We have to actually blow through the maze ourselves and help them get to where they want to go. So the first question, how are you going to give them some freedoms? And that's everything down to, if you're signing up for a contract for a mobile phone, maybe we used to lock you into a certain number of months, but now we have to actually be able to give you the space and be able to give you, and the same with gym memberships. No longer do you sign up for 12 months. You have to be able to sign up week by week. And so freedom, to build freedom into your product proposition, build freedoms and give them some control. If you are able to give consumers some sense of control, it may be the only thing they can control at the moment in their lives. And therefore you win as a brand relationship. Second one, which kind of moves on from that quite easily, is attachment. So how do we form better attachments with our consumers, which is the question every brand should always be asking itself, actually. But right now we have huge opportunity in this space. So again, think about this. We're coming from a space where we're kind of lonely and scared. And again, that means that we have to have a desire to form new attachments. And actually, again, going back to the science and the psychology of captivity, you all are familiar with Stockholm Syndrome. So Stockholm Syndrome being the moment where you actually attach yourself emotionally to the abuser. So someone has kidnapped you and you actually attach yourselves to them. And that happens because when you are scared and uncertain, you tend to yearn and seek attachment. You want to jump into the arms of anybody around you. That fear moment, when you're scared, you seek someone to help you, and whoever's around and near you, you jump into their arms. And that is happening right now for everybody. Because we're isolated and lonely and helpless and anxious and bored, we yearn attachments. So you're going to attach yourself to the people around you, obviously, your friends and family, but also to brands. And this is the point. When we're trying to build brand loyalty, we're always seeking attachment to our customer. But we're never gifted a year like we have today, where consumers are actually yearning attachment. So if we get it right, this is the moment where you can really build strong brand loyalty. And people, of course, attach themselves negatively in the pandemic also. If you had a slight gambling problem, for instance, it wasn't great to be locked in your own home, was it? Because you were going to spend all your time attaching yourself in a negative way to your addiction. Similarly, we all attached ourselves to technology. Zoom, it was a particular winner. Here's the share price. And in fact, even look at the share price. I started talking to you about the share price in Zoom in the beginning of the pandemic in April. And by around May, it had doubled. And I'd said to people, wow, imagine if you'd invested. But even look what happened from May to now. It has again even doubled more and tripled, in fact. So it continues. So there was winners in the pandemic where we attached ourselves, and Zoom became a brand. It was a brand name, but it became just like the Hoover. It became a ubiquitous with digital connection. Some people attached themselves to retail. The Amazon boxes kept on coming, and so attachments are interesting. But attachments ultimately are all about forming relationships, and that's what we all seek with our customers. And also, it's about using this pandemic now to form better relationships, more and deeper relationships. Both, by the way, in your business life, in your professional life, but also in your personal life. This is the moment where we can be genuine about what we want in relationship. And so I think when the dust settles on the whole pandemic and humankind, in fact, looks at ourselves and looks inward, we actually realize that, and I spoke about this last year with you about not being in an experiential economy, and it's not about stuff anymore, it's about experiences. we actually now value true human connection. That's what we value. And consumers, particularly and customers, value human connection with everybody, with brands and businesses also. And so I want to bring you through an emotional engagement ladder, which I've designed to kind of teach people about the importance of compassion. So let's start at the end there, where we have indifference. So what is indifference? Indifference is a state where you fail to recognize someone's suffering. You fail to recognize the fact that they're in trouble. And imagine being in a personal relationship. The best way to understand this ladder from a business point of view is to reflect it in your personal relationships. So imagine if you were in a personal relationship with somebody, your wife, your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, and they were indifferent to your needs. Now, it would be unhealthy for you to stay in that relationship, because if someone's indifferent to your needs, then there's no love there, and so you need to get out. And the same thing, unfortunately, happens with business. Most business interactions, they're quite indifferent. They're very transactional. The business doesn't really care about the customer, so it's not a good place to be. The next level up is pity. And pity is where you acknowledge someone's suffering. At least you acknowledge it. But the point is here, you don't really do anything about it. Think about walking down the street and you walk past a homeless person and you look at them and you pity them that they have no place to live, but on you go. There's no actual sympathy. There's no, oh well. And again, in a corporate environment, in a customer relationship environment, that's not a good place, because you're not building anything. At least in the middle there, at level 3, you've got sympathy. And sympathy is where not only do you pity the fact that they're suffering, you care. You actually care that they're suffering. And at least then there's some level of emotional engagement now. There's feels going on. The yellow level there, level 4, is empathy. And empathy is where you not only do you care that they're suffering, but you feel they're suffering with them. And that is the great thing about the global pandemic, that everybody is affected. And so if someone's suffering, then you can understand their suffering at a better level than you would have otherwise, and you can therefore share the suffering with them. But only when you get to level 5, when you get to compassion, do you have an action. So at that level in compassion, you're relieving their suffering because you're doing something about it. There's a lovely expression I've always liked called love is a verb. So when you say I love you to someone, it doesn't really mean much unless you actually do something to show that love. And the same thing is true in customer and consumer relation. You have to actually do something, be action orientated. People often describe themselves as compassionate, but unless you're actually doing something to help the customer, doing something to help the person who's suffering, then you're not compassionate, because then you're just being empathetic or sympathetic. So you have to actually drive up that ladder and wonder, well, what are we doing as a brand or business? What are we doing to help people through this pandemic? What are we doing to actually really show that we care? So this is what I call compassionate commerce. Compassionate commerce is not putting profit first, but it's putting the consumer first, but not just as a concept or philosophy, but actually show me on paper what you've done. And then you can call yourself compassionate. Otherwise, you're lower down that ladder. I'm going to show you the last video that I'm going to show you today. The tech team will be happy. I keep making them work. This is a video from South Africa. It's from a few years ago. It's actually a Christmas video. So there's going to be some Christmas music in this. Get ready. I know it's a bit early, but hey. And so it was a tough economic year in South Africa that year. And so Pick n Pay is a supermarket, and they offered to pay for the groceries of the shopper at the end of their shop as a surprise. So it's a nice little marketing viral. But I want you to watch the shoppers, and I want you to watch what happens when you climb that ladder. Not only do you get to sympathy, empathy, but when you get to compassion, when you do something to make a change in someone's life, I want you to watch the consumer, watch the whites of their eyes, and watch how they react, and just get a sense of the feels behind what happens when you practice compassionate commerce. So play the video there, please.
Good morning, ma'am. How are you?
Well, thanks. Just tired.
Tired. Good morning, ma'am. How are you? I'm well, thank you. Have you done all your Christmas shopping already?
So you'll probably see me next week.
I'm from Pick n Pay, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for being shoppers at Pick n Pay.
Because you're a loyal shopper, I know that for a fact firsthand.
You are receiving your entire shop for free.
Are you serious?
Yes, I am. Very?
Really?
Yes.
Okay. We are paying for this whole shop. This whole shop.
Everything today is free of charge.
I should have shopped more.
You can say that.
It is for free.
With compliments, your entire shop is for free. Oh.
So I'm going to give it to the lady for free. That's it. Okay, well.
So you can see the joy, can't you? Yeah, there's a huge difference here between empathy and sympathy, and when you step into the space and do something. So you see the laughter, the crying, the hugs, and that's the moment when you've done something. When you've done something for a consumer, that they show that love. And there was love shown on those screens, wasn't there? There was the hug and the chest and the head leaning in and all those. So that's the kind of the result that you want from your consumer connections. That's when you know that you want to climb that ladder and get to that compassion place. And so ask yourself the question, how are you going to form relevant emotive attachments during this time? So the attachment value is there for you to take, but you need to do something action-based to help those consumers and people form better attachments with you, no matter what you do. And that's also, by the way, true of your personal relationships and your family and friends right now. Show compassion and build better relationships. The third value I want to talk about is community. And community is a really interesting, strong value. Of course, it's always been inherent in humankind. We have always yearned for connection and for human connection. It's a natural, inherent want in ourselves, in our instincts to connect. We are a tribal people. So think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Do you remember that wonderful hierarchy of needs that Maslow has taught us all these years? And so the basic needs, the physiological, the safety needs, this idea that you need food and water and shelter first before you satisfy anything. Then you need to feel that you're safe in your employment and in your personal space. But once you've achieved all that, it's love and belonging that you really, really yearn for. As a human, that's the next level that you want to achieve. Love and belonging. You want friendship and intimacy and family and sense of connection. And those things were slightly taken away from us in the pandemic. And that's, of course, quite scary. And so think about this. If you arrived up on a desert island after a shipwreck, the first thing you would do is seek shelter and water and food. You wouldn't start to self-actualize and meditate. There are basics that are needed. But once you've got that, the love and belonging piece will kick in very fast. And we see that. Do you remember the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks years ago when he makes Wilson the little ball? Because he needs someone to talk to and someone to feel that he belongs to. And so that is so powerful. And as I said, because humans are a tribal people, in modern society, we replicate those tribes today. And so what we do is we have family tribes, we have work colleague tribes, and we miss those tribes right now digitally because we're not there physically, and that's hard for us. And of course, we also miss the tribes in terms of social tribes that we form. And then we'd have sport-related tribes, gym tribes and rugby tribes. And then we have our digital tribes on Pinterest and Facebook and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram. And so we are a tribal people. We want to belong. And we saw that really powerfully actually in the pandemic across the world. There's lovely moments when Italy, from the early pandemic in Italy, when they all played instruments from their balconies. We saw it in the UK with the NHS applause every single night, people applauding for their frontline workers. In Germany, we saw them fly. I mean, remember, Germany had very, very low rates in the beginning, and they were flying people from Italy who were infected back into Germany for treatment, importing the virus. Crazy, but that, it was a time to help. And then people helped in their own local communities. So here you're out for a walk and you see this picture, someone, if you're feeling low, take a cactus. I've grown loads. And so this idea of people helping people is one of my favorites. This is a little kid. You can read that in your own time there. So he's 9 years old, and because he missed his birthday in the States, he offered to play Happy Birthday or a few other songs on your lawn for you with his little violin through your window so he could make you happy on your birthday. And please email my mom to arrange. It's so cute. So even a 9-year-old understood the idea of community and giving back. These are a couple of other examples. This guy here in Italy was an Albanian. He arrived to Italy 10 years ago. The sign there gives the story. It says, look, I arrived here 10 years ago. You welcomed me as a refugee, and I've set up this business, and thank you so much. And now is my time to thank you and give you some support. So please take some fruit and vegetables for free. And so this idea of, I'm here to give back now. And the other picture there is a maths teacher. This girl in the States doing some online learning, not really understanding the geometry lesson. And so the teacher gets in his pickup truck and drives around to her house and teaches her the geometry lesson through the window with a marker. And that's lovely. It's a lovely moment where an educator, goes above and beyond to try and connect. Again, remember, forming relations and helping with the attachment. So there's a lot of community stuff going on. And then, of course, commercial community was also a big part of it. That's personal community. But commercial was, here's Brewdog. Brewdog is a small micro brewery in Scotland. And they offered everybody a beer in the world when this pandemic was over. The idea, you went onto Facebook, downloaded the voucher, and no matter where you are in the world, you could, if they stocked Brewdog, then you could have a free one. And of course, that was a fantastic global sampling opportunity, a fantastic global supply chain opportunity, pushing their product all over the world. And even there was a small pub in Glasgow that actually delivered beer during the pandemic to their locals in a little car. The idea that if you can't come to the pub, we can come to you for free, of course. And so this is the way you build, remember, compassionate commerce? This is the way you build it, by being there for people when they needed you. And even IKEA released their famous Swedish meatballs recipe online, with the idea that if our stores are closed, how will you get your Swedish meatballs? Well, you can stay at home and make them yourself. I guess that's kind of good with the IKEA philosophy. You have to make everything yourself anyway. But that was their way of saying, hey, we're here for you. Even adult entertainment brands got involved to say, hey, look, have the premium services for free. You're all stuck at home. We'll give you something to do. So the idea here, how are you going to contribute to community connection? Ask yourself that. If you run a business or an education institution or whatever, how are you contributing here to community connection? Because people, again, are yearning the connection, they're yearning attachments, they're scared, they fear, they want their freedoms, but how are you going to make them feel that they belong? And again, that's really important. If we can bring that to life as a value, then of course we start to form fantastic relationships with our customers. And the last value I want to talk about with you this morning is the digital step jump. We can't, it's a digital agenda today, and we can't ignore the fact that digital drives so much of our lives. So digital has always, and I spoke to you last year about this, the digital transformation journey that we were on, that every touch point in our lives was already turning digital. But now, of course, we have just experienced, 7-8 months of the biggest digital training course in the world. We now completely live in a phygital reality where, the physical and the digital lie side by side in one reality. So everybody now online shops. My own mother, who is 77, I did her online shopping for the first time ever. She would never have used online shopping, but now she does. And because she used it during the pandemic, the early days, even though the supermarkets are open now and less busy, she still does it once a month to get the big stuff. And so we see huge behavioral changes in all generations. And in fact, one of my staff members taught me a story about her mother in her 70s. She taught her mother how to use Zoom on a Monday. And by Wednesday, 2 days later, her mother was doing crochet classes on Zoom with all her older friends. So she had become a digital tutor in 2 days. So this was fascinating me as a cyber behaviorist, which is kind of the anthropology of digital behavior. I was fascinated by how quickly, let's say, generations that mightn't have been digital native were taking to digital, and how digital was invading every aspect of our lives. Think about, we were eating now, all the food was coming to us on Uber Eats and Deliveroo. We were traveling, but we were using digital VR or YouTube. A lot of people used YouTube this year to travel because they couldn't physically travel, so they still educated themselves. This was the really interesting part for me, socializing digitally. So we always had social media, but that wasn't socializing. It was just kind of catching up on news. Whereas here we had socializing via digital. So we had people having dinner parties and poker nights and friend meetings and drinks. And that to me was really interesting because it's the digitalization of something that is deeply physical. Social contact is a physical thing, really. And here we were quite comfortable doing it digitally. And that to me was a tipping point for the digital integration in our lives. And so we were all working from home. And I've just spotted that cat. That cat is clearly very angry that his owner works from home every day now. Why aren't you leaving for work? So this idea of, are we now at a tipping point where the way we work change forever? We need those buildings and glass cages that we've built all over the world. Maybe we need to live a much healthier life where we can integrate work and personal life in a way that will actually drive innovation and creativity as opposed to cold glass cages. And so digital transformation now is a fascinating space where we have an opportunity not just to use digital to get better at things, but to really integrate it into our lives. So you have to ask yourself the question, how are you going to deliver now on digital to survive? Because it's a digital first world now, not digital second. Even if you have a physical asset business, it's actually digital which will drive success in the business. So there are 4 key values of this new captive economy. So what can you take away maybe and some big takeaways? Let's take the first one. The freedom and control. So customers are looking for freedom. We're all looking for freedoms. We have so much uncertainty in our lives. We're looking for some control. So what you need to do is you need to design everything around the customer. Give them flexibility to dissolve all that fear they have. Don't dilute the customer experience. Don't be that Wuhan taped off chairs business. Be the teddy bear business. Be the vertical concert. So we need to give them control, give them a feeling that they matter, and take this fear away. That's our job. Number 2, in terms of doing something about this, is being proactive. So you need to be proactive you don't sit back here and wait for customers to come to you with their problems. Now is the time to really be proactive with the business. Pivot the business, look for agility, look for recruiting people in terms of talent, for instance, that actually have that agility gene inside them, and build on adaptation. pivot the business, look for new opportunities, escape the rip current. Number 3 is connecting with authenticity and heart to be part of the community. So that puts that emotional attachment that we talked about in attachment in with the community value. So be real, be genuine. Think creatively, of course, give back to the community, and focus on compassionate commerce, not commercial interest. Number 4 is that digital piece I just spoke about, embedding digital deeply into how you do customer connections in terms of the product proposition, because digital is just here as a reality. And lastly, think about that. When I talked about the recovery and the ebb and flow, we have a now, a then, and a when. And if you break down the recovery into 3 parts, which is going to be stretched over, let's say, 2 or 3 years even, you have to wonder, well, what are we doing for the next 6 weeks? What do consumers need from us for the next 6 weeks? What do they need for the next 6 months, and what do they need for the next 2 years? And you need to keep pivoting the business. And that's hopefully a point that you take away from this presentation, that the agility that I'm talking about and the creative need will be there all the time, because things are going to keep changing, and the roller coaster is going to go back and upside down sometimes, and you're going to need to be able to pivot at all times. I want to finish with a summary of a blog I wrote recently, and we might take some questions on this too. I wrote a blog called The Circular Solution to the COVID Crisis, because I became very interested in a conversation I had. I went to a workshop where I built a shamanic drum. I also, by the way, broke my leg recently, but it's fine now. So I built a shamanic drum at this drumming workshop. But at the workshop, I met 3 women. And the 3 women were witches. Now, of course, I first thought, pointy hats. But actually, they celebrate the feminine. They were celebrants of the matriarchy, and they, from a religious and spiritual point of view, would describe themselves as pagans. And they worship Mother Earth and the moon, and like all indigenous people actually did in Africa and in Asia, and the Aborigines and the Native Indians. They always worshipped, the nature and Earth. And so I spoke to them at lunch, I remember, about this, their philosophies. They were very interesting ladies, and they started talking about the patriarchy versus the matriarchy. And this idea that in a patriarchal world that we have built and we live in, we love hierarchies. So the government is a hierarchy, the education system is a hierarchy, the healthcare system is a hierarchy, the army, the military is a hierarchy. And the problem with hierarchies run by the patriarchs is that responsibility flows down. They're not agile, they're very slow-moving structures, and there is responsibility in silos at all levels. I thought that's really interesting, because that is a shape and an organizational structure that is inherently wrong for what we're going through right now. Because we need agility, we need creativity, and we need vulnerability of our leaders. And our leaders can't lead this way vulnerably in structure. And so also they started talking all about the male ego. And they're right, by the way. The male ego runs businesses in a very poor way, because the male ego is very goal-orientated. And if you have a goal-orientated recovery here, you're going to exhaust yourself, as I said. If you're looking for that linear recovery, I want it here by the end of the year. I want the sales target to be back to here. You're going to exhaust yourself, because you're trying to push the ball against forces that are stronger than you. And so actually now is the time to lead with feminine energy, I think. And they were talking about the circle. Instead of being, the circle is actually, the symbol of femininity. And in a circular organization, for example, in a flat circular organization, the leader puts themselves in the center of the circle and sends strands out to each of the teams and each of the managers like a spider's web. And the information flows across those strands back and forth to the various. There's no silos. Everyone is in this together. And in fact, in a circle, the way witches celebrate, for instance, is a circle. Think about any Hollywood movie you saw. They all stand around the cauldron. They stand around. And in pagan times, it was the same. They stand around a circle. Compare that to Christianity or Muslim faith or Buddhism or Hindu, any of the religions. There is a hierarchy. There's an imam, there's a priest, there's a rabbi who stands at the top, and you will listen. Whereas pagans co-celebrate. When women get together as in a pagan ceremony, they stand in a circle and they all celebrate together. So there's a co-celebration, co-creation, basically. That's what you need in a structure today. You need co-creation. You need everyone creating together. And sometimes, by the way, in a circular organization, the leader can step out from the middle, and other people can take that space or leave it empty, and people can inter-orbit amongst themselves. So this power of the circle is really interesting. I think we should take this away in terms of the recovery and think about our structures of our organizations being inherently wrong. And maybe we need to flatten them down and make them more circular and make the creativity and the innovation and the vulnerability, by the way, kind of interact with each other, and less of the hierarchies and more of that feminine energy. That's just a thought to take away from today. So by the way, I've summarized all today. I know it's a very visual presentation that I've just given you there, and sometimes some of you will have taken notes, which is great. Others of you might not have. So what I've done is I've put a little PDF document together. I'm going to give it to the crew there at Digital Agenda, and they can push it out to you on email. So it gives you just a 4 or 5 page summary of what I've said today, and maybe that will help you in your own life, both personally and professionally, to have later on. If you've enjoyed all the conversation this morning, remember my blog is there, kenhughes.info/blog. And there's lots of stuff up there on the emotional and the psychological stages of the recovery, and lots of other stuff too, of course. I'm sure many of you have subscribed from last year also. But if you are interested in the pandemic and the psychological impact and what's going on, and there's a new content every couple of weeks. And there's also a newsletter. So if you subscribe to that blog once a month, you will get the newsletter, which has lots of video and business cases and what people are doing. So again, listen, if you've enjoyed the speech this morning, you definitely enjoy the newsletter that you get just once a month. I think once a month is plenty for newsletters. And if you don't like to read, you can always jump on the YouTube channel, Ken Hughes, and every blog and everything I do is all there on YouTube in little 5-minute videos for you to relax and to watch. So listen, that's the end of my speech. If you want to ask me any questions, obviously we'll have a chat now. But afterwards, after today, if anything comes up for you, you can always reach out to me on Facebook, on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, or Instagram. Ken Hughes IE is my tag, and I'm always happy to have a chat to you all.